Hi, JP2. Welcome to another week of JP2 Artist Studio. This week is heavy texture painting, impasto post-impressionism. You're probably wondering, what is post-impressionism and what do all those fancy words mean? There are a number of different techniques that are used in post-impressionism, but the idea is this, is that you are creating compositions using thick strokes of paint, different textures to create and capture the essence of a subject rather than small details. So you are using a mixing medium in order to create thicker paste-like paint to create textures. And this is typically used to create landscapes. When you are creating your landscapes, you're going to be mixing this texture paste with your different colors of acrylics. And we're going to kind of go through step by step what this looks like today. What you guys are going to be able to do is you're going to be able to create a 3-part landscape. Now, this is just an example here. This one is a little bit more complex because we have the background, we have the middle ground here with a little bit of greenery, and then we've got the foreground of the plains here. This particular painting has quite a bit more detail in it, which takes a lot of practice. But we can simplify this into 3 sections to try at home. You're going to separate it into a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. What are you going to need to be able to do this at home? Typically, impasto painting requires a special kind of medium that you would buy from Michaels, which can be expensive. And right now, we are all in our homes. So what you can do is you can use the following items to actually create your own mixing medium. You will need a mixing bowl, Elmer's school glue, acrylic paint, a butter knife, baby powder or baking powder, preferably baby powder, a canvas, and or a cardboard if you don't have canvas at home, and of course a measuring tablespoon. Here's your recipe. In order to make your mixing paste, you need a 1/4 cup of baby powder or baking powder, 1.5 tablespoons of Elmer's glue, and your mixed acrylic color that you want. So you can use white, blue, whatever it is that you're actually going to create on your landscape. When you are mixing your texture paste, you might have to add more glue or more baby powder, depending on how your texture turns out and depending on the fluidity of your acrylic paint. That's why it's important to know the texture of your paint. So for example, I have 2 different types of paint at home. This Crafters acrylic is standard dollar store edition from Dollarama, and this is a slightly higher quality acrylic paint. This one from the Dollarama is quite liquidy, whereas the Liquitex Basics acrylic paint is very paste-like. So when I mix my mixture, I'm going to have to adjust the amount of baby powder depending on what type of acrylic paint that I'm using. So, step 1, you need to sketch a landscape and keep it very, very simple. Post-impressionism is more about the essence of a landscape as opposed to the fine details. You're going to create details through impasto painting and layering and manipulating the texture and the colors. So, for your super simple example at home to experiment with, you can see here that we've broken down our 3 sections. We've got our background, which will be our sky. We've got mountains, that'll be our middle ground. And then we've got our foreground, that will be our plains. Step 2 is to start on your sky. You need to mix your medium to create a texture that is thick enough to hold the swirls and the movement that you're going to create in your sky. So using that same recipe, a 1/4 cup of baby powder to a 1.5 tablespoons of glue, and then mixing in your blue color. Sky texture is created through making small and large circles in the mixture, just as you see in my example picture here. I use a scraping tool. You can use the back of a paintbrush or even a butter knife to scrape in and do all of these swirls in different directions. It's really important that you do not overblend when you are working with this medium. You can create peaks and valleys in your texture by taking your paintbrush and flicking upwards as you make those circular motions. Once you've laid down your blue color, you can later go on and stipple in white clouds over top of this texture once your blue sky has set. Step 2 is to move on to what the texture is going to look like for your mountains. Mountain texture can be created by scraping random horizontal lines through the brown paste. I also recommend that you mix in some black and darker browns to create more dimension in your color. I dollop a little bit of black right on top of the brown, and I again take my scraping tool and I'm scraping horizontal lines through the brown, dragging that black through it. You don't want to overblend because then your black is just going to blend in with your brown and it doesn't create the dimension that you want. Step 3 is a little bit messy. Step 3 is creating your wheat texture or your plain texture. This becomes your foreground. With your wheat or your plain texture, you want to make your texture paste a little bit thicker. So add a little bit extra baby powder to your mixture. And you're going to lay down the thick paste once you've mixed in your yellow. And you're going to take a butter knife, and you can see here, you're going to scrape vertically up on that yellow paste. Don't scrape up and down because that won't create the wispy vertical kind of texture that you want of the wheat. You want to be scraping from the bottom of your canvas upwards towards those mountains. After, again, you can mix in darker browns to create more dimension in the color. When you're layering those accent colors, make sure that you paint in the same direction that you are scraping so that it stays consistent. And again, super important, do not overblend. The more you blend, the less texture you will have. Okay, I'm really excited for you guys to have a chance to try this at home. There are a few key things here. Really important to remember that this is harder than it looks. So start simple. Experiment with the 3 basic parts of a landscape first. Once you've mastered the mixing of those textures, then what you can do is you can use a reference photo to create or recreate an impressionist landscape. You can use a reference photo or you can just make one up on your own. That's totally up to you. Again, very important with impasto painting. Do not overblend. It's going to be very tempting to keep blending and blending and blending away. The more that you blend, the less texture you will actually have. You can always go and dry brush paint over top of your textures once they are dry. This will allow you to create light and shadows and slightly more detail in your final composition. Finally, snap your pictures, show us your process, your product. It's messy, it's fun, it's experimental, and you can always tag us on Facebook, on Instagram at the JP2 Artist Studio, or send me your final compositions, your pictures, so that we can share them with everybody. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoy.